He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad didn't want you running the business. He said it should stay with the men." And then he added, without a trace of irony, "It's nothing personal. I'm Dana Whitaker. I'm 45, live in Sutton Hollow, Michigan, population just under 5,000, not counting the raccoons that take over the dump in the spring. I've lived here my whole life. Married here, divorced here, buried my father here. And until last month, I thought I'd die here owning and running Whitaker & Son Hardware, just like my dad always said I would. Turns out, that was a nice little story to keep me loyal." Dad passed suddenly in early March. It was a Sunday. He was restocking shelves in aisle 4, the PVC connectors, when his heart just gave out. Customers found him slumped on the floor with a clipboard still in his hand. The town held its breath. He was a fixture here. My dad, Earl Whitaker, wasn't just a hardware guy, he was Main Street. He could tell you the right drill bit by the sound your engine made. And he had a soft spot for new business owners, gave them discounts before they even asked. And I was his right hand. I'd been running the store for the past 6 years, unofficially, sure, but we all knew the score. Nolan, my younger brother, had moved back from Chicago just last summer, after burning through his second startup and a girlfriend with trust fund connections. Before that, he hadn't set foot in that store since 2003. So I didn't expect what came next. The will reading was at Mr. Lacey's office, just off Maple Avenue. It was quiet, formal. Just the three of us, me, Nolan, and the lawyer, surrounded by mahogany furniture and a watercolor painting of the lake that hadn't been blue since the 90s. Mr. Lacey read through the documents with his usual slow drawl until he got to the store. That's when Nolan leaned forward a little in his chair. "To my son, Nolan Whitaker, I leave full ownership and operational control of Whitaker & Son Hardware," Mr. Lacey read aloud, his voice tightening. "It is my expressed wish that the business continue through the male line of the family." I didn't speak. I stared at the grain in the conference table and focused on the knot just left of center. I felt heat crawling up my neck, but I didn't let it reach my face. I wouldn't give Nolan that satisfaction. He exhaled like someone who'd been holding a heavy secret for too long. "We talked about it before he died," he said, shrugging. "Dad wanted to keep tradition. You know how he was." I blinked. "No. Actually, I don't. Because he never said a word to me about this." Mr. Lacey coughed softly, like he didn't want to be here anymore. I looked at him. "Is that all?" He nodded. I stood up without shaking their hands. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen of the farmhouse I inherited from Grandma Jo, nursing a mug of peppermint tea that tasted like betrayal. Nolan had gotten to him. That was the only explanation. Dad was many things, stubborn, old-fashioned, occasionally gruff, but he wasn't cruel. He never would have written that exact phrasing unless someone else had whispered it into his ear. The male line. That wasn't how he talked. That was Nolan's language. Corporate, exclusionary, smug. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Last fall, Dad stopped asking me to sign off on supplier invoices. Said he'd handle it for now. Nolan had been coming around more, asking about profit margins, loan terms, even mentioned expanding. I didn't think much of it. Figured he was just curious, or maybe finally interested in pitching in. But that was the first sign. The quiet shift of power. The slow erosion of trust. I was just too busy running the place to notice the ground slipping out from under me. When I showed up to the store the next week, out of habit more than anything, Nolan had already changed the locks. "You still have your key?" he asked when I rattled the handle at the side entrance. "I meant to call you. We rekeyed everything for insurance reasons." "Sure. Insurance." He let me in, as a guest. Not a partner. Not even staff. Just someone who used to belong. Inside, things were different already. The old corkboard of employee birthdays and local event flyers? Gone. Replaced by a flat-screen TV playing looped promotional videos about DIY lawn care tips narrated by some influencer I didn't recognize. The front register where I trained 3 generations of local kids? Nolan had upgraded it to a sleek touchscreen kiosk and installed self-checkout stands. And when I peeked into the back office, my father's office, I felt my stomach drop. The photo of me and Dad in front of the store on its 30th anniversary, the one where I'm wearing his old apron and holding up a sign that said Future Boss? It was gone. In its place? A framed diploma Nolan earned from an online MBA program. "You're welcome to stick around, you know," Nolan said, clapping a hand on my shoulder like a man comforting a fired employee. "Maybe help out in the paint section? Just till you figure out your next move." "I didn't realize I needed a next move," I said quietly. He gave a little shrug. "Time marches on. I should have left then. I should have walked out and never looked back. But I didn't. Because I was raised to finish what I start. Because I wanted to believe there was still a piece of Dad left in this place. Because I needed time to figure out what the heck just happened. And that's when I heard it." 2 days later, behind the staff door, I heard Nolan talking to his new assistant, some guy named Brent who wore loafers with no socks. "Dana's fine. She doesn't have the spine to leave. She'll hang around doing paperwork until she finds someone to marry her." They both laughed. It wasn't just insulting. It was small. Lazy. Unoriginal. And it cut deep anyway. I walked out before they noticed me and drove home in silence, passing the bakery, the barber shop, the closed-down video rental spot. Main Street looked the same, but I felt like a ghost in it now. I parked, stepped out, and stood across the street from the hardware store. From his store. The big display window still had my chalkboard lettering on it, "Fall sale on shovels and salt." The sign Dad used to let me decorate every season. And that's when I saw it. Directly across the street, the old Davis and Sons storefront. Empty for years. For lease sign in the window. And beneath it, scrawled in marker on a yellow sticky note. "Make it yours." That was the moment. Not when I lost the store. Not when he cut me out. Not when they laughed. No, it was this. This exact second. The moment I looked across Main Street and realized. I'm not done. Not even close. I didn't show up to the store on Monday. Or Tuesday. Or any day after that. Nolan never called. Never asked where I was. I guess he figured I'd faded off like a leftover sign in the window, still visible, but no longer relevant. He didn't even bother to send a text. That's how I knew. That's how I truly, finally knew I'd never been a partner in his eyes, just a placeholder until he was ready to step in. People in town didn't know what to make of it. I could feel their eyes on me in line at the grocery store, behind the post office counter, at the library drop-off. Nobody said anything directly, but they talked around me. Poor Dana must be grieving hard. Always was close to Earl. Probably needs space. And I let them believe that, because it was easier than telling them the truth, that I hadn't just lost my father. I'd lost my future. I'd lost the life I spent decades building, one shipment, one shelf, one customer at a time. And worse, I'd been cut out of it by my own brother, a man who hadn't earned a single inch of that floorboard under his feet. The house was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. I stopped answering calls. I let voicemails pile up. I canceled lunch with the Rotary Club ladies and didn't return the invites for the chamber mixer. I started deleting emails without reading them, even the ones from people I used to care about. I told myself I was grieving, but that wasn't quite it. Grief is sharp. It's a blade. This was more like wading through cement, slow, heavy, muting everything around me. There was a day, maybe the third or fourth after the will reading, when I found myself standing in the laundry room, staring at a single work shirt that still smelled like the hardware store. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that the light bulb above me started buzzing. When I finally moved, it was only to ball up the shirt and press it to my face. I didn't cry loudly. I didn't collapse. I just let the silence wrap around me and understood, for the first time, what it felt like to disappear in your own life. The town moved on without me. Nolan started putting up new flyers. Grand reopening, in bold red type. I saw one tacked to the corkboard at Mel's Diner, right over the old community class schedule I used to update every season. He had Brad, that overconfident assistant of his, record some kind of cheesy promo video for Facebook. New management, modern tools, same Whitaker service you love. I watched it once, then closed my laptop and didn't open it for 3 days. Every time I passed the storefront across the street, I glanced at the vacancy sign, but never for more than a second. It felt too raw. Like looking directly at sunlight after being underground. I wasn't ready. But Nolan wasn't content to just take over. He wanted everyone to see it. The encounter happened at the bakery, about 2 weeks after I stopped coming in. I'd gone in early for a fresh sourdough loaf, wearing an old jacket and no makeup, hoping to slip in and out unnoticed. But there he was, Nolan, standing at the counter, charming poor Louise behind the register with some story about a client from out of town who said our store had more flavor than Home Depot. Mallory was beside him, sipping her almond milk latte like a queen in exile. She spotted me before he did and offered that fake little smile that says I'm pretending to be kind so no one sees the knives behind my teeth. Well, look who it is, Nolan said, like he was announcing a guest on a talk show. Didn't expect to see you out and about. I do leave the house, I replied, lifting the corner of my mouth in something too small to be called a smile. Mallory adjusted her sunglasses, yes, indoors, and added, we just assumed you were traveling or something. Taking some personal time. I guess you could call it that. Nolan stepped forward, a little too close. The store's doing really well. I made a few changes, streamlining things. Efficiency's up. Customers love it. I nodded slowly. Customers love wood paneling and fluorescent lights? He ignored the dig. We're actually thinking about expansion. There's a lot next door, might buy it and add an equipment rental wing. Already started putting together a pitch deck. Sounds impressive, I said evenly. Dad always said the best business decisions came from someone who's never stocked a shelf. His smile faltered for just a second. That's when I saw it, a flicker behind the eyes. Insecurity. Maybe even fear. He wasn't as confident as he acted. He was playing a part, one he barely understood. Mallory cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. We were invited to the chamber dinner next week. Nolan's giving a little speech. You should come. I tilted my head. Why? So I can hear about the empire you're building off my blueprint? Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm not trying to erase you, Dana. But Dad made a decision. You have to accept that. I stepped past them without another word. But as I reached the door, I turned back and said quietly, you might want to double-check whose name is still on that backroom lease. Tradition doesn't hold up in court. I left him standing there, holding a coffee cup that suddenly looked too small in his hand. Later that day, I found myself back across the street from the store. I wasn't there to spy, not exactly. I was just watching. Watching the foot traffic. Watching who went in and who came out. Watching how many people peeked through the windows but didn't step inside. I had brought a thermos of tea and sat on the bench like I was just enjoying the October chill. That's when I noticed something. Brad fumbled a customer order, brought out the wrong brand of fertilizer and had to run back inside, leaving the guy visibly annoyed. Another woman exited shaking her head and muttering under her breath about the prices. I took out the notebook I'd been pretending not to care about and jotted a few notes. 10:42 a.m. Brad messes up again. 10:49 a.m. Customer complains about lack of variety. 10:55 a.m. Third walk-in leaves empty-handed. Then I drew a small asterisk in the corner of the page, next to the phrase. Let them feel the loss before they know they've lost it. People assumed I was done. They saw me at the library, returning cookbooks. They saw me buying paint samples at the hardware chain 30 minutes out of town. They saw me walking early in the morning, passing the same vacant storefront over and over. I didn't correct them. I let them believe I was wandering, lost, aimless, retreating. But what they didn't see was the spreadsheet open on my laptop after midnight. They didn't see the draft emails to suppliers I still had relationships with. They didn't see the line of credit I opened in my maiden name, or the floor plan mock-ups I was editing with a former contractor from town who owed me a favor. They didn't know that I had already met with the property owner of the vacant storefront. They didn't know that the offer was accepted last Friday. Or that the papers were signed this morning. And they certainly didn't see me later that evening, after Nolan had locked up and the streetlights flickered on, walk across Main Street with a roll of blue painter's tape and a single sheet of printer paper in my hand. I stood at the glass door of that quiet, dusty building, the one people stopped seeing years ago, and I taped the sign right in the center of the window. Coming soon. Main Street Makers, Tools, Repairs, Community. No social media post. No grand announcement. Just that. As I stepped back and looked at the sign from the sidewalk, I heard someone walk up behind me. A deep voice, familiar. New cafe opening? Charlie from the bank asked, arms crossed, wearing that wool jacket he's had since forever. Something like that, I said. You look different. I smiled. That's because I finally remembered who I am. He nodded, quiet for a moment. I always said you should have run that store. I turned to him. I am. The first real shift came on a Tuesday morning, when I sat across from a lawyer in a glassy office suite 2 counties over, feeling the dull throb of nerves in my palms. Her name was Simone Hayes, early 40s, calm, with a dry wit and a mind like a scalpel. Charlie from the bank had recommended her quietly, with a single sentence, she's the one you call when you want to play the long game, and win. I had a folder in my lap that I'd been building for weeks, filled with copies of emails, supplier contracts, and inventory records from my last year managing the store, all of which showed Nolan hadn't just inherited a business. He'd been orchestrating a handover long before Dad ever passed. Simone flipped through the documents slowly, her eyes scanning the details without once breaking rhythm, until she finally looked up. You're telling me your father changed the will less than 6 weeks before his death, right after your brother started requesting financial records and quote sheets you used to manage? Yes. And your name was originally intended to be on the will? Dad told me that himself. He said he wanted me to carry the store into the next generation. He said Nolan wasn't steady enough. That was just 6 months before the change. Simone leaned back, tapping a pen against the desk. This looks like undue influence at best, manipulation at worst. Especially if your father was in declining health. A judge might be very interested in these emails. I don't want the store back, I told her plainly. I don't want to drag his name through the mud either. But I do want to make sure my brother knows exactly what he did, and what I'm capable of. Simone gave a half-smile, all calculation and cool resolve. Then let's make sure he finds out in a way he never forgets. The next day, I made the first official supplier agreement for Main Street Makers, with Dale from Iron Ridge Supplies. He'd been on the fence the last time we spoke, hesitant to pull business from Nolan unless he had a good reason. But now, sitting in the small back room of his warehouse, I watched his expression change as I showed him my new layout plans, my service model, my loyalty program, my community class calendar, all of it. He sat back and whistled low. You're not just building a copy of Whitaker hardware, he said, impressed. You're building the future of what that place should have become. I'm not just trying to compete, I said softly. I'm trying to reclaim what was mine before he hijacked it. Dale nodded and stuck out his hand. I'll pull my next 3 orders from your side. Let Nolan figure it out when the shipments stop showing up. Meanwhile, Nolan was busy tightening his grip, which only made the cracks more visible. He launched a winter kickoff sale, with big posters plastered around town, slashing prices on snowblowers and toolkits. But one afternoon, standing in line at the bakery, I overheard 2 regulars, Mr. and Mrs. Langley, talking about the debacle that happened in his store that morning. He tried to upcharge me for the exact same shovel I bought last year for $15 less, Mr. Langley said, shaking his head. Said it was due to inflation. I asked if inflation only applied to me. His wife snorted. Then Brad offered to order one for us on Amazon. In front of 3 customers. Nolan's face turned the color of raw meat. I smiled into my coffee sleeve. I didn't need to sabotage his business. He was doing it all by himself. But not everything was unfolding in silence. A week later, I ran into Mallory at the print shop again. This time, she wasn't fake nice. She was watching me. Studying me. And for once, she didn't pretend to be surprised to see me there. You've been busy, she said, tilting her head. Just getting ready for the new year, I replied, rolling up the promotional banner I had just reviewed. Her eyes didn't move from mine. Nolan thinks you're trying to steal the business. He said you're playing dirty. Funny, I said, he's the only one who's ever cheated in our family. She shifted her weight and crossed her arms. You think people will just follow you because you put a fresh coat of paint on an old idea? I met her gaze without blinking. No. I think they'll follow me because I know what I'm doing. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. Her lips tightened. He's put everything into that store. His money. His name. His pride. He put my work into that store, I said. And then called it his. Mallory looked at me for a long beat, then leaned in slightly. You're going to humiliate him. I didn't answer. I just smiled. A small, quiet thing. By then, word had already begun to ripple through Sutton Hollow. People were talking. Not just in whispers, but in those cautious, excited tones that small towns adopt when change is in the air. I heard it at Mel's Diner when 2 high school shop teachers debated whether to bring their students to a new DIY workshop across from Whitaker's. I heard it at the bank when I stopped by to sign a final vendor transfer and overheard Charlie telling a customer, "There's going to be a shakeup soon, you didn't hear it from me." And then, a few days before Christmas, it happened. I was walking past Nolan's store, casually as I always did, when I heard raised voices through the half-open front door. I paused near the curb under the guise of checking my phone, and listened. "I don't care what the contract says," Nolan barked. "They've supplied us for over a decade, they can't just pull out." Brad stammered something I couldn't make out. "Dale's siding with her," Nolan snapped. "This is sabotage." I turned and kept walking, just as he stormed out the door and nearly barreled into me on the sidewalk. "You think this is funny?" he snapped, not even bothering to hide his rage. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Don't play dumb, Dana," he hissed, low and bitter. "You've been sniffing around my suppliers. Stealing my vendors. Undermining me." "I haven't stolen anything," I said evenly. "Everything I've done has been above board. Maybe you're just seeing what it looks like when someone earns loyalty the hard way." "You're trying to ruin me," he said, and for a second, just a second, I saw panic flicker in his eyes. I tilted my head. "You seem to be doing a fine job of that all by yourself." He glared at me, breathing hard, fists clenched at his sides like he wanted to shout but didn't have a single word sharp enough to throw. "Watch yourself," he finally muttered, before turning back inside. I kept walking, heart calm, pace even. The next day, Mallory was seen crying in her car outside the Pilates studio. Whether it was about Nolan, or the store, or the fact that her reflection was no longer flawless, I couldn't say. but it meant something was unraveling. The balance was shifting. And it was almost time. The morning of my grand opening felt strange, like waking up inside a memory that had finally caught up with me. The air was cold, brittle, and bright, and Main Street still had the faint shimmer of overnight frost. I arrived at the shop before dawn, unlocked the door, and stepped into the quiet hum of everything I'd built. The soft smell of wood polish and brewed coffee filled the air. The Main Street Maker's banner hung across the front window, sunlight creeping across the words like a benediction. There were no corporate logos, no gimmicks, no loud colors, just community tables, clean shelves, and warmth. I wanted people to feel like they belonged the moment they walked in, the way I always did when Dad's store still felt like ours. By 9 o'clock, the place was full. Not a grand crowd, but the right one, the kind that mattered. Families, contractors, students, retirees, small business owners from upstate, even a few curious faces from the local paper. The mayor stopped by to shake my hand. There were free donuts on the counter, hammers engraved with the store's logo as keepsakes, and a line at the register before we'd even officially opened. And right on schedule, Nolan arrived. He didn't walk in quietly. The bell above the door clanged harder than usual when he pushed it open, and I swear half the people in the store turned at once. He was wearing a tailored coat that looked too polished for Sutton Hollow and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days. Mallory trailed behind him, perfect as ever but clearly tense. I could see the muscle working in Nolan's jaw as he took in the room, the people, the shelves, the coffee bar, the sign above the counter that read built by hand. Run by heart. His eyes lingered on that one. Nice crowd, he said finally, voice sharp enough to slice the air. Didn't realize the town was this desperate for a novelty shop. I smiled gently. Not novelty. Necessity. He gave a dry laugh, though his hands twitched at his sides. You really think you can outlast me with this? You don't have the overhead or the supply chain. I've got vendors, contracts, accounts. Had, I said. What? You had vendors. You had contracts. And you had accounts. I nodded toward Dale, who was chatting near the display table with 2 customers. You should have paid your invoices on time. And you shouldn't have let your assistant send supplier information to the wrong person. You'd be amazed how many people remembered who actually ran things when Dad was sick. He looked at me then, really looked. You've been planning this. Since the day you changed the locks. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The chatter of customers carried over the silence between us. Mallory looked around nervously, then leaned close to whisper something to him, but he brushed her off. You can't just take everything from me, Dana. It's not yours to take. You took it first, I said. All I did was take it back. Before he could respond, Councilwoman Langford appeared at his side, clipboard in hand. Mr. Whitaker, about your expansion permit. Not now, he snapped. She raised an eyebrow. I just thought you'd want to know that the zoning board rejected your appeal. Seems your proposed rental lot overlaps with the new community zone that Dana's business qualified under. But I'm sure you'll get it sorted. And with that, she turned and left him standing there, flushed and silent. He stayed only a few more minutes, long enough for people to notice that the air around him had changed. He wasn't the charming businessman anymore, he was a man being quietly outpaced by the truth. He left without saying goodbye. That afternoon, I sat in my office behind the workshop, the hum of laughter and chatter echoing through the open space, and pulled out my folder labeled proof. Inside were copies of everything, the emails he'd sent behind Dad's back, the supplier quotes under my name, even the message he'd sent the lawyer days before the will was changed. I didn't need them anymore. They'd done their job. But holding them felt like holding my own story again, the one he'd tried to edit me out of. Over the next 2 weeks, Nolan spiraled. I didn't have to witness it firsthand, the town did that for me. People talked. They said his store had cut hours. That Brad had quit. That a few suppliers had backed out of contracts, citing inconsistent management. Then came the legal letter Simone drafted, the one that challenged Dad's will and accused Nolan of manipulating a dying man for financial gain. We knew it wouldn't make it to court. It didn't need to. It just had to make him feel what it was like to lose control. And it worked. He tried to fight back, oh, he did. He called me one evening, his voice hoarse and uneven. "You think you've won something here?" he said. "You think this makes you better? You're killing the family name." "I'm saving it," I replied. "You can't run that place forever, Dana. You'll burn out. You'll fail. And when you do, don't think anyone will bail you out." "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But I'll fail honestly, which is more than you can say." He hung up after that. But a week later, a "closed for restructuring" sign appeared on his window. No warning, no press release, just a piece of paper taped crookedly behind the glass. People whispered that creditors were involved. Others said he'd tried to sell inventory under the table to cover debt. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know. Then one morning, Dale walked into my shop holding a folded piece of paper. "You'll want to see this," he said. It was a listing. Whitaker Hardware, building for sale. I stared at it for a long moment, the words blurring just slightly. "Funny," I said softly. "He always told me some things should stay in the family." Dale smiled. "Guess you're keeping that tradition alive." 2 weeks later, the deal was closed. When I walked into the old store again, it didn't feel like his space. It felt hollow, stripped of pretense. The shelves were half empty. The faint scent of dust and old sawdust lingered. Sunlight spilled across the worn wooden floor where Dad once stood teaching me how to measure boards. I walked the aisles slowly, fingers trailing along the counters, remembering every moment that had led me here, the years of loyalty, the betrayal, the silence, the rebuilding. I wasn't angry anymore. Just steady. In the back office, where his framed diploma still hung crooked on the wall, I placed a new placard on the desk. Whitaker Commons, co-working, creativity, community. It would be a shared space for small business owners, local artisans, and students to work, learn, and connect, everything Dad's store once represented, before Nolan turned it into something shallow. I left the old family sign hanging above the door. It didn't belong to him, and it didn't need to. It belonged to me, to this town, and to every person who believed that hard work could outlast entitlement. I saw Nolan one last time before spring. He was sitting at the corner cafe, wearing the same coat from my grand opening, shoulders slumped, hands wrapped around a cup that had long gone cold. When he saw me, he looked almost relieved, like part of him had been waiting. "You really bought it," he said quietly. "The store. The building. Everything." "I did." He let out a small, breathy laugh, the kind that wasn't really laughter at all. "You were always the better one, you know. Dad just never saw it." "He saw it," I said. "He just didn't say it soon enough." He nodded, eyes down. "So what now? You'll turn it into some charity thing? Make me the villain forever?" I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet stretch between us, watching the snow melt into puddles on the sidewalk. "No," I said softly. "You made yourself the villain. I just stopped pretending you were the hero." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He looked at me one last time, nodded once, and went back to staring at his reflection in the coffee cup. I left him there, the sound of the doorbell behind me sharp and final. As I walked past the two storefronts, one buzzing with life, the other empty but full of potential, I thought of Dad again. Of the day he handed me a wrench when I was 9 and said, "Everything breaks eventually, kiddo. What matters is knowing how to fix it." I smiled then, not bitterly, but with a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Because I'd done exactly that. They tried to bury the Whitaker name under greed and pride. All I did was dig it back up and rebuild it, one piece at a time.